Doctrine and Covenants 41 through 44. These revelations were all given to Joseph Smith during the first month after his arrival in Kirtland, Ohio, where the saints had been told to gather. So what were these revelations, and why did they all come so quickly together? Let's dive in. After God revealed to the saints that they were to move to Ohio, Joseph and Emma Smith packed up almost immediately and were ready to move by the end of January. They, along with 4 elders of the church, traveled from New York to Ohio, preaching the gospel along the way. Now, when Joseph drove into Kirtland in a sleigh on February 1st, 1831, he stopped in front of the Gilbert and Whitney store. Joseph jumped from the sleigh, went into the store, and immediately walked up to Newell K. Whitney, saying, "Newell K. Whitney, thou art the man." Newell, who had never seen Joseph in his life, was quite stunned and replied, "Stranger, you have the advantage of me. I could not call you by name as you have me." Joseph then replied, "I am Joseph, the prophet. You have prayed me here. Now what do you want of me?" Newell had indeed prayed earnestly for the prophet to come to Kirtland, perhaps because of the spirit of confusion that prevailed among the 100 or so new converts in the area. The missionaries who had taught and baptized the Ohio saints, including Newell, were obliged to continue traveling to fulfill their mission to the Lamanites. So the new converts were left with no priesthood authority, no handbooks, and no real idea of what to do. They knew the church was true, but they didn't know how to run it properly. It's not surprising, then, that some strange ideas had crept into their worship and that more continued to pop up even after Joseph arrived. For example, an African-American man called Black Pete claimed to receive letters directly from heaven. Another man claimed he could see a ball of light in the sky, which he followed right to the edge of a precipice and went over, but was luckily saved from death by landing in a tree. After Joseph's arrival, a woman named Mrs. Hubble said she believed in the restored church, but claimed to be a prophetess with a seer stone through which she could receive commandments and laws for the church. Joseph was dismayed to hear and see of such behavior, but he felt certain it was the efforts of the adversary to bring shame and ruin to the church, and so he went to work to teach and correct the Ohio saints. In the midst of his efforts to clear up spiritual confusion, the Lord gave Joseph the revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants 41. In this revelation, the Lord gave some timely instructions about how he wanted things to proceed in Kirtland. Joseph was to build a house to live and translate in. Sidney Rigdon was given leave to choose whether to build a house or not, and the first church bishop was called. But perhaps even more importantly, the Lord told Joseph that he was to gather the elders of the church so they could establish the laws of the church, something desperately needed amidst such chaos. 5 days later, with most of the New York church members still in the process of preparing to move to Ohio, Joseph gathered with a small number of elders. And while they were gathered, Joseph received by revelation the law God had promised to send them, in what is now known as Doctrine and Covenants 42, verses 1 through 72. As Joseph received that revelation, it would have been clear to all present that he was communing with heaven. At such times, his face would shine and become what one person described as peculiarly clear. As Joseph received this revelation, the Lord taught the elders many things, including ordinations to church offices must be done by those in authority. The gospel is to be taught from the scriptures, which contain the fullness of the gospel. The church articles were to be adhered to as they were given in Doctrine and Covenants 20. They were to care for the poor in an organized way by giving of their excess to the bishop. And the Lord had plans for the people to build a temple. The church elders now had their marching orders and they proceeded to act on them. But 2 weeks later, while alone, Joseph received a little bit of a PS to that revelation in the form of verses 73 through 93. The young church already had members who were struggling to adhere to its laws, and so the Lord taught Joseph how those who sinned were to be dealt with. Though the Lord encouraged charity towards all, he did clarify an important administrative action to be taken with sinners. Church disciplinary councils were to be held for those who had committed adultery. Now, it was shortly after these revelations were received that Mrs. Hubble came among the saints, claiming to have prophetic visions through a seer stone and confusing a lot of people. Mrs. Hubble caused enough of a stir that Joseph felt it necessary to inquire of the Lord about her, and Doctrine and Covenants 43 was given. In this revelation, the Lord clearly stated that revelations for the church would be given through his ordained prophet of the church. This revelation made it clear that the Lord's church is one of order and that priesthood ordination and authorization was required. What a relief for Joseph to have this clearly taught by the Lord. In a church where everyone can receive revelation, not just anyone can receive revelation for the entire church. With these three revelations in hand and with new understanding and unity among church members, Joseph seemed to have doused most of the spiritual fires that had begun in Kirtland. Now that regular matters of church business could be attended to, the Lord gave Joseph the revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants 44, which reminded him of a law given to the church in Doctrine and Covenants 20 a little less than a year before. In this revelation, the Lord had instructed that the church elders meet in a conference every 3 months. They had so far met on April 6, 1830, June 9, 1830, September 26, 1830, and January 2, 1831. But with the call for the saints to move to Ohio, no church conferences had been planned since January. This new revelation called the New York saints and missionaries in the field to gather to Ohio for a church conference, which they scheduled for the beginning of June. The gathering to Ohio had officially begun.
Hey, I'm Krista. I am the voice behind these videos, and I wanted to ask you for a favor. So it is not cheap to make these videos. It costs quite a bit of money, and I would love your help to keep making them. I want to make the scriptures as simple as possible and as interesting as possible for everybody. So there's a new donation button link. If you feel prompted to share $1, share $5 once or repeatedly, whatever you can do to help would be so appreciated. Thanks so much.